Carol Sanford, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
I'm really excited to chat with you today. You have such an interesting background, and the topic for today on role perception and work and making meaningful change in the world is something I feel strongly about, and I'm really interested to hear your unique take on these different topics. So this should be a really great and interesting conversation.
Great, and I love sharing my perspective on all that. So I think you're right. Great conversation.
Awesome. Well, as we get started, I just want to start by sharing your bio with the listeners. Carol Sanford is consistently recognized as a thought leader working side by side with Fortune 500 and new economy executive teams, designing and leading systematic business change and design. She's a senior fellow of social innovation at Babson College, founder of the regenerative business development community, change agent development community. Her best-selling books have 15 awards, are required reading at leading business and management schools, including Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, MIT, and others. Carol also partners with producing executive education through Babson College and Chaos Pilot in Denmark, University of Washington, and the Lewis Institute at Babson. Her books are filled with case stories from around the world with lots of diversity represented. Again, a great, really interesting background, and I see we share a lot of that that scholar and professorial orientation and a lot of the work we do, and I'm just excited to talk with you. Anything you would like to add before we really dive on in?
I think the only thing that I would add to it is my fifth book, the one we're going to end up talking about, is based on an action learning project. And so we had over 100 people involved. So there's the scholar place that we share. So thought that might be useful to you.
Yeah, wonderful. And action learning and various forms of experiential learning and problem-based learning are just, for geeking out a little bit in terms of the academic side, that it's really great pedagogy and a great way to get students engaged in material and giving them a chance to really better understand through application what they're learning in the classroom and how it applies to the real world. So that's really cool. And I definitely am interested in hearing more about that.
Okay.
Well, as we get started, I just was hoping you could provide your way of thinking about roles. Mm-hmm. We all carry a lot of different roles in our lives, and they intersect and they overlap, and they impact other areas. So how would you define roles? Why are they important to understand? And what does it mean to change the way we see our current roles?
Okay. Now, and that, of course, is the heart of the regenerative life research we did and book I wrote. I think the first thing it helps is to think about roles in two levels or layers. You're speaking about life roles, which is what I call the base layer. We go out and we do sometimes they're related to our career, most often, like I'm a teacher or I'm an accountant. And we call it a role because we play it in a context, right? We're doing it as part of our contribution. But there's the second layer of roles, which is what I'm talking about, which in all cultures have been known and named. They've been called archetypes. I call them meta roles. And the way they work is we choose them at a point in time. So I have folks who are parents, for example, or who are supervisors, who may at some point step into being an educator rather than just carrying out what a supervisor would normally do or a parent. And that's because those roles have an archetypal kind of meaning. They have kind of an essence that allow us to put into our mind an uplifting and aspirational and probably a highly useful way of engaging with people. So this book was about looking not at the career level of life of me doing things, but me of serving society or serving in a larger way, standing in a meta role. Does that make some sense?
Absolutely, and I love that framing, and it slightly shifts the way our orientation and the way we're thinking about roles. So that's wonderful. So I guess the follow up to that is, why do you feel it's important to shift our perception of roles, and what kind of impact can that have?
Well, I am the granddaughter of a half Mohawk who knew about archetype from the Iroquois Nation kind of framing. And one of the things that he said his great grandfather had taught him is when the Great Disruption came and the Trail of Tears and all of the reservations were established, you had to know how to regenerate a society. You had to regenerate a nation. And in order to have any nation work, and this is true in a lot of indigenous cultures which have not been overly colonized by outside forces, they know that these roles are important. So my grandfather taught me about head man, head woman, warrior, which did not mean go to war. It meant ask what's worth fighting for. And I write about this in an earlier book, the clown, which helped us see the elephant in the room, the hunter, which helped not just feed us, but understand how it was that we took care of the ecosystem we lived in so it and we both could eat. So I grew up with going to the farm, going to the pig pen, all that stuff with my grandfather, but it was never about this lower role. And I don't mean lesser role, I mean like daily life role. It was always about asking me, what is our role with these pigs? My grandfather raised pigs, right, among many other things. And it never occurred to me that I had a role with them. I mean, I thought about them, most people, I guess, think about it as they have a role in feeding me or going to market and sell them. Nope, my grandfather wanted me to understand roles in that way. And he, as I got older, helped me see that I had roles in a culture, I had roles in society. And if people didn't step up to those, you didn't have a working society. So that's, again, kind of the foundation of the research we did, is looking at what makes society work and what roles have to be there. Now, the daily life roles will go on, but what meta roles do you need to take on in order to step in at various points in time and create a system that works for all, not for most, not for some, but for all. Because that was the point of my grandfather's lessons, is those meta roles make a society work, but they also make an organization work, and they make a family work. And so understanding these is about the working of something, is why it's important. And understanding how we can play, we found 9 of them, how we may play all 9. I pretty much, over a period of a few months, will end up multiple times playing different roles, even when I'm just like with a corporate team in front of me. I don't always do it the same. I'm asking, what role is needed to make this work?
That's awesome. It really is a different way to view the role of roles, right, in society. And I think that's really great. I love the idea of meta roles, and really just the focus on the interconnectedness of everything. And I like how you framed it in terms of kind of this having a functional and working society, a system that benefits all. And I think, we're given the current pandemic and the racial concerns throughout the country and the protesting, Black Lives Matter. We just finished Pride Month. There's lots of angst, political, social angst, and frustrations, and we have systems that aren't functioning correctly,
Yeah.
right? And so if we want to really understand how we can go about tackling these really complex societal problems, it fundamentally needs to start with our firm understanding of these various meta roles. So I'm curious, how do we change our society's view of change, how to impact change, how to have meaningful, long-lasting, sustainable change when we're in the middle of this kind of a turbulent, tumultuous climate?
The exciting part is this is the perfect time to do that. Because to bring about change and to confront people's theory of change, you have to have disruption. I normally go into an organization and spend a lot of time creating the disruption. I'm very disruptive when I work with people. Part of it is I'm really contrarian on my theory of change, but I take on a role, and I think there are three meta roles that are core to this point in time, and I'll tell you how I've been working with them as examples. The first meta role is educator. Now, I don't mean necessarily in a classroom. I just ran a series of morning meetings when the pandemic started, and then as we moved into the racial demonstrations and asking for more understanding of what happens, particularly in Black communities. But as you point out, bias exists with many communities which are set aside, and we're trying to raise that up, including with Pride Month. And there's ageism, you could go on and on. I ran a series of morning meetings with people who are members of my communities. I have business communities which people hang out with me several times a year over many, many years, and individual change agents. And I stepped into this role, and there were two things that I brought in the education role. One was first an understanding of how to manage yourself. I did 27 days on that. And if anyone who's listening to your podcast would like to hear those, they're all recorded and on Facebook. And if they go to the Regenerative Life community and you answer the questions, you can join. If you don't answer the questions, I'll never know you showed up. That's an educator role, to try and give people, how in the world do I create me being stable enough I can help bring change? All right, so we have to do that. We have to work. You asked, how in the world do we do that? How do we bring about change? First, we have to educate ourselves to be self-managing in regard to our reactivity, our arrogance, our hubris, and being able to put ourselves in a position of being useful, being purposeful. But the second set of days I did for my corporate clients was what I call designing bias out of your structures, systems, and processes. Because people can't see that they're actually designing bias-making machinery in their organizations, in their work systems, in how they manage people, in how they do strategy. So just so people have an example of that, if you have any system that categorizes people and says, we have high, low, and medium performers, we have 4 types of people who learn 4 different ways, you're teaching the mind. This is my theory of change, and it's pretty well documented in many other places. You're teaching the mind to categorize. And we don't have that built into our mental structure. We don't come in, except the only category we have is what might eat me and what might be food. But that's like at the reptilian level, right? So if we're designing work that builds bias in, and I have 7 of those kind of processes, that my work is educating, right? It's to help people see. Now, I don't give advice, I don't consult, I educate. I think that's a more powerful meta role than being the content provider, the knowledge provider. So that's one role. I'm going to keep going to the second one. You can stop me if you want to put something in here.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think I think that's a powerful way to view our work in organizations. even though you're taking on what many would call a consulting role, a content expert, subject matter
Yeah.
expert role, but you frame it in terms of educating,
Yep.
and the fact that you're trying to break down processes, procedures, policies, the systems
Right. So
that.
I need to correct you.
Oh, please, please.
I'm not an expert. I tell people, do not trust me under any condition. Don't accept what I say. Don't assume that I'm coming to you as an expert. Test everything. I don't give you a what to do. You will have no checklist. You will have no specific. I don't give advice. You can't say to me, here's what we're doing, what we should, how are we doing? I tell them you have to switch epistemology. And if you've got an epistemology which is based on an expert, you've created another system that can be a problem. So that's another one that I confront. I'm not an expert. I am a person who cares about this. I help frame how people think, and then they become their own expert.
No, thank you. That's really good. And my comment was on how other people tend to label, right, and frame it. And I think that's absolutely right. It's so frustrating when I found myself in those types of situations working with clients, or when I'm teaching a class, helping students learn how to do it. I've seen so many times where it's just so dysfunctional and it just doesn't work. You don't drive the change that you're seeking within the organization. And they do see it that way. They see it as, and sometimes it's because they feel like they're inadequate and they don't know how to do it. Sometimes it's because they want to outsource the responsibility and accountability, having the quote unquote expert come in and tell them what to do. Regardless of the reason, that's not how meaningful, sustainable change is enacted within organizations. It's a matter of asking the right questions, pushing, probing, getting them to think reflexively, and over time you can start to break down those systems like you've been talking about, to make sure that we, to the extent possible, and hopefully more and more over time, that we can rid our organizations, our policies, practices, procedures, our culture of all these latent biases and various conditions that just really don't serve a healthy purpose for the organization.
Yeah, we can design them out if we understand what they are. And that's part of what, for me, the educator role is helping people learn to see and be discerning about what they're doing. I just am publishing an article, because you and I are so much, and it's the worlds we live in, right? Think about the educator role. I have an article in 6 parts, I think, that's going up today that is called, what did I call it? The Regenerative Educator View. And it's on Medium, and it's taking what you and I are talking about right now and laying it out in 7 living systems principles about what education looks like when we're here. Now, that's in another role, the media content creator, because the other thing, I'm still in your question of what do we need to be doing right now to help guide change through the tumultuous times that we are in. We have to have ways of having something that is in front of people, like the educator, but has ongoing access. And I think right now our media content creators are not really serving the kind of role that they really need to be helping us play. They need to be creating much more illumination on the systemic effects of actions. And often what they do is become just confrontive and don't help lift up what are the systemic effects. So if I'm in a meta role of media content creator, because that's not my life's work, but I have written 5 books, I've created 800 videos, I run 4 podcasts, and the reason I do all that is to combine my educator and my media content creator. So I think we've got to change. Maybe it's better to say we have to bring in people like you who are talking and create more media access to written video, podcasts, the kinds of things that help over time bump people's mind, disrupt what they're currently thinking. So those are two of the three, what I call disruptor roles, that I think are necessary in times of change to get in there, get their hands dirty, but step into the meta role of it, not the confronting, tear it all apart only role.
Awesome. That's really great. So building off of what you just said, looking at kind of a more systemic approach to change, that's kind of tedious, right? That's tedious work that requires consistent attention, commitment, to slowly work through the types of embedded problematic systems that exist and create more healthy systems to go in their place. One of the things I really like about your work is you talk about the non-heroic approach to change. How do you feel like that overlaps with what we've been discussing? Maybe you can define that for us.
Well, it's perfect. Let me say, this is related to the idea of it's not tedious because you don't work on it the normal way. So most people work on change using an incredibly outdated theory of how change works. It's based on the physical world, and it was created by Newton in the 18th century, Sir Isaac Newton, who I am a descendant of, so I get a right to critique his work. And it's based on the idea that if you think of the idea of a cue stick and a cue ball, and you're trying to play billiards and get it into the pocket, did you hit the ball? It moves because you hit it, and it drops exactly where you want it to go. And that's the theory we have of how it happens. And so the hero becomes the one who is willing to step up, confront it directly, take on whatever it has, and get it to move into the pocket. Now, Einstein had a couple of thoughts about that. One was that complex systems don't work that way, and humans don't, but we still, in our organizational, educational, media, all those theories of change, we have the Newtonian idea. Now, what does it look like if you had a quantum view, Einstein's version? Well, he says most of that kind of change happens in a field, and you can't predict what's going to happen when you hit something. You may create more side effects than you create direct effects. We know this from the idea of working on culture. And we know that you go into a house or a party or anywhere, and you can tell that there is an atmosphere. Now, by that, we mean this complex kind of process. But the hero, or the non-hero, can work on generating a field just by doing what we were talking about. You stay in your everyday occupation, your everyday career, but you take on these roles just in how you do it. And if you're working that way, you're working much more in line with Einstein's idea. And I actually think when Einstein said, if we try and create a new world with the old paradigm, the Newtonian classical paradigm, we will not get there. We will have the same process. So we can't create a world free of racism, a world free of unfairness, a world free of climate change. We can't do any of those things only by the heroic, and mostly I talk about the book trying to find the heroes. And I thought when I was a kid, I was going to be one of those. I was going to be a hero. And my grandfather beat a lot of that out of me, saying, you're part of something, you're part of community, and you want to be in that community. So we move out of the heroic, where we're trying to use a cue stick metaphor on machinery, or follow behavioral science, which says if you get cheese at the end of the maze, the rats will go there. Actually, complex systems, including humans, don't work that way. They work with the indirect culture in the non-heroic, everyday, I step into it, and I don't have to lay my life on the line. I have to lay my mind on the line. I have to be willing to kill all my old ideas about how change happens. In this study, I mentioned earlier that we did it with a learning and action research and learning process. And I had over 100 people, 122 people, I think, who joined. And the way we did it is they get educated on this way where you and I are talking about right now, this non-heroic, take on meta roles, see what they're all people who want to change the world. They all use terms like that, change the course of history. And we ask them then to go out and apply it and come back, do a little more, go out and apply that. And I had them keeping a journaling process. All of them, 100% of them said it profoundly changed them. Most of them got so they were able to see some significant change in the meta role they were taking on, whether it was parent or designer or earth tender or educator, entrepreneur, media content creator, economic shaper, citizen, and spirit resource. That's all 9. And they were able to come back and share stories, which I filled the book with, about what it meant. And they were all said, I'm so exhausted with the trying to be a hero. I'm so exhausted with, and I had 2 people who actually used the word, the tediousness of everyday life. This feels so uplifting, and it means I'm growing. So that's a little on my thoughts on the subject.
Excellent, excellent. I think, like you said, the reflection and understanding how we fit is so vital, so important.
Yeah.
And ultimately, can we all impact major change? To an extent, sure. It's possible, but that's not the point, right? The point is to better understand ourselves and how we fit into our current system, and how we can change ourselves and thereby start to change what's in direct proximity to us. And then over time, perhaps we might have the opportunity to have broader change.
We will. We are affecting that broad change right now in a negative way by not being conscious, by not working in meta roles. And my whole point and what we found in the study were, think about you and your role when you're actually in the meta educator role, right? And we play both when we're in a classroom or with a client system. We are affecting them and they're affecting, there's a multiplier effect. So I tell people, you don't trade off any bigness, any grandness, any major understanding of what you're doing. You are just doing it in a way that it affects this and the next. And I look at I'm getting old now, right? I'm going to be 80 next year. And what I look at is the number of people who I've touched, and I make them be members of something. I never went into the movies so I could have that platform. Instead, I work on a few people at a time in a non-heroic way. And I watch the effect of the leaders in corporations who are heading major Fortune 500 companies now over time. Nope, you can make major changes, but you don't do it by making major moves with a cue stick.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, wonderful. We're about out of time, but before we finish today, I want to give you a chance to share with the listeners, how can they get in touch with you, find your book, find out more about what you're doing?
Well, one place to start is carolsanford.com. It's all about me. And on there are links to my membership communities, to my corporate activity, which are on different websites than that one. But all 5 books are there. They all have links. The one we've been talking about today is The Regenerative Life. And it's about really changing, transforming organizations, really recreating our life and the roles we play. I have 4 podcasts. The one that'll be most interesting, I think, to your listeners is Business Second Opinion. And although it has business in it, I mean organization. And it is not an interview podcast like this one. It's one where I critique Harvard Business Review, one article and idea at a time, and give an alternative. Because I do large scale systems design, including I have stories like all the amazing work we did in South Africa with companies and the communities and in Europe. So you can go find those books and the stories, and there's even a page tells you something about each and how they all relate. And the podcast is on carolsanford.com. I think it says Second Opinion. So it's not hard to find me. And if you really need something, you can email me. And guess what my email is? Carol@carolsanford.com. So thank you, Jonathan, so much for inviting me.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Such fascinating insights and perspectives on all of this. And I hope my listeners will look you up and reach out to you. And I wish you the best, and perhaps we can continue this discussion at a later date.
Great. That would be fabulous.
Okay. Wonderful. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope my listeners have a great week.